Hello, everyone. So, welcome back. This is the income expenditure model discussion part two. In today's video, we are going to discuss about some of the topics we haven't covered yet for this income expenditure model. So, just very briefly to go over what we discussed in the last video. We found that there is a macroeconomic equilibrium in our model, which is when the planned aggregate expenditure equals to the aggregate outputs in the economy. This is also when the firm can actually accurately plan out their inventories in the economy so that they can continue to produce the amounts that they plan out in the future periods. However, if the planned inventory actually is not the same as the actual inventories in the economy, when firms facing a higher level of inventory as they planned it ahead of time, they will reduce the future productions because they are producing too much, so they are storing this inventory. If they're seeing a significant decrease in their current period's inventory because they're selling a lot more than what they planned out from the beginning, in the future periods, they would like to increase the level of output. And we also learn how to build this model with the visualizations. We look at the Keynesian cross and how it helps us to visualize the equilibrium outputs in the model. And we also practice it with the mathematical solutions. So we can use a little algebra to kind of like just solving for the aggregate outputs levels that reach the equilibrium. Today, what we want to focus on is to think about what if there is a change in the economy. And specifically, what we are referring here is the change of spending. So as you can imagine, there are many factors that can actually change the total amount of spending in terms of consumptions or investment spending, even though we only have two agencies assumed in this simple model. And you can think about this, suppose when a firm, all of a sudden, for whatever reason there is, they feel like they are very optimistic about their future productions that can make more profits. And since they are facing the same interest rate every period, if they have this increase in perceived probabilities or profitability abilities in the future, they might want to borrow even more money at the same cost to invest for new machineries or equipment or maybe trainings. So again, this sudden increase in investment spending in the economy might actually end up affecting the aggregate expenditure functions and leading to the change of the equilibrium outputs. Well, same could happen if there is a sudden change of consumptions. Maybe because the households decided to buy more essential goods for their everyday needs. Instead of like having 2 cookies a day, they now buy 4 cookies because they feel like, well, this is the standards, right? Spending now. That also will boost the total level of consumptions in the economy. And we would like to actually think about like how those changes will affect our model. Well, specifically, we are actually referring to the expenditure called autonomous expenditure. So in our previous mathematical examples, we actually seen this autonomous expenditure in the equations. So remember, we have a consumption function equals to 100 plus 0.75y. The amount of the money spent initially, which is the $100, assuming incomes is 0, right? So that would be always the money that we are going to spend. That $100, it's basically what we refer to the autonomous spending in the economy. So also, you can imagine any kind of spending that it's not related to the change of national income, Y, we'll also consider as autonomous spending. So that's why investment spending we define is just a number. It's not related to income at all. In this case, we also define investment spending, at least in this simple hypothetical economy setup. It's part of the autonomous spending or autonomous expenditures. Now, graphically, we would like to understand what we mean by the change of autonomous expenditures and non-autonomous expenditure. Whenever there is a change of non-autonomous expenditure, you would expect the changes actually happens on the same expenditure lines or expenditure functions. In our model, because what only non-autonomous expenditure only exists in the consumption functions. So you can simply imagine what could change the size of the consumptions in the economy that relates to the income, which is the part we define 0.75 times y. So that's the portions in the equation that we refer to the non-autonomous expenditure. However, if there is any change of the autonomous expenditure, let's say the $100, the $25 that we define in the consumption functions and the investment spending functions, that is basically the change of autonomous expenditure. And any change of autonomous expenditure will shift the aggregate expenditure functions up or down. So hopefully visualization will help you to understand the difference between the change of autonomous expenditure and non-autonomous expenditure. We're not going to go into very deep details about like what shift the autonomous expenditure here, but instead I just want to make sure everyone getting a concept of the change of non-autonomous expenditure has nothing to do with the shift of the graph, but just the point moving along the same curve. Now let's suppose we have currently a aggregate expenditure function, which is C1 plus I. So there are some amounts of consumption, some amounts of investment spending in the economy, and we plot it with these blue lines. And all of a sudden, there is a change in autonomous expenditure. And let's suppose we have a different consumptions starting point. So instead of maybe $100, now people are spending $120. Right? So this new aggregate expenditure function actually suggests that the blue line will shift up by whatever the amount spent additional in the economy. Now let's say, well, if people actually spending $10 additional in this economy, well, is the economy going to increase the ultimate final aggregate outputs by just $10 in value? So the question is, if someone's spending $10 additional in the economy, will the economy just produce $10 additional more worth of goods and services, or maybe less, or maybe even stay the same? So to evaluate this, we would like to actually compare the distance here. As you can see, the aggregate expenditure functions with C1 plus I and C2 plus I will increase by a distance of the heights of these shifts. And that's the additional dollars spent in the economy. If the economy will get to the new equilibrium where the outputs will increase by only just, let's say, $10. So people spend $10 additional in the economy to buy goods and services. And if the economy actually meeting the new equilibrium by $10, as you can see, it should be moving towards to that point on the graph. However, the new equilibrium in the economy is much further. So the economy outputs, it's not going to just increase by $10 additional worth of goods and services. Now, this is the questions. How come someone actually spend $10 additional and the new economic outputs, it's not actually increased by just $10, but more than $10? So this is always a questions that students ask in a macroeconomic class. And to answer these questions, we have to understand a very complex concept. Well, in order to investigate this phenomenon here, we would like to actually give a new terminology here to kind of give us a concept about this behavior of spending from the households. This concept is called the marginal propensity to consume, and sometimes we refer to the term MPC. So marginal propensity to consume basically describes the portions of the extra dollar of income that a household would spend in the economy. So when a household actually receives one additional dollar of income, how much of that $1 of income additional received by the household will be spent in the economy to buy goods and services? Well, in our previous consumption functions, we actually know what is the marginal propensity to consume. If you look carefully to these equations, where consumption equals to 100 plus 0.75 times y. When y changed by $1, 1 times 0.705, it will equals to 75 cents. So that means for every $1 increase in income, additional 75 cents will be spent in the economy to buy goods and services. So the MPC in this case is 0.75. So generally speaking, the marginal propensity to consume, it's basically the slope of the consumption functions in our case. And to be honest, as long as the consumption function is a straight lines in a linear form, the marginal propensity to consume will always equal to the slope of the consumption functions. Now, why is this marginal propensity to consume it's important to us? Well, we have to explain with these intuitions here. And this is what we call the multiplier effect in the economy. Well, if you imagine there is a one additional dollar spending happens in the economy, well, someone in the economy, of course, at least will have to produce that one additional dollar worth of goods and services immediately. Now the thing is, this one additional dollar of spending will create one additional dollar of outputs. Remember, in chapter 1, we talk about the principle of macroeconomics. When someone's spending money, the money spent in the economy, and that money will become the income of another person. So for instance, let's say you are buying a newspaper from a supermarket. The $1 you spend on the newspaper will be received by the supermarket owner. And the owner of the supermarket will receive that $1 as his income. So remember, whenever the additional dollar of income goes into a pocket, people will spend a portion of that dollar. So that means the owner of the supermarket will spend a portion of this dollar. And we know what that portion is, which is the marginal propensity to consume. So the owner of the supermarket will spend a portion of the dollar to buy something that he wants or he likes. And the next person receive it will spend a portion and a portion of a dollar. And then again, the next person receive it will spend a portion and a portion and a portion of a dollar. And it will go on. Well, when the dollar is being spent multiple times, as you can see, the value of the dollar will add up. Every time when someone spends this additional amount of the dollar in the economy to buy goods and services, the economy will have to produce that amount of goods and services. And at the end, we can find the sum of all this spending. So end up, what would be the final values? Well, it seems like the mathematical term is very difficult to see. But don't worry, some mathematicians are already solving the problem for us. Well, this multiplier effect will have 1 over 1 minus the MPC in our problems. So for instance, if we have MPC equals to 0.75, then the multiplier effect will be 1 over 1 minus 0.75. Well, as long as MPC is within the range of 0 and 1, this solution will always be valid. Well, then you should ask yourself the question, is MPC always going to be between 0 and 1? And of course, the answer is yes. And the intuitive is, MPC represents, well, how much of your income will be spent back in the economy. And obviously, you cannot actually spend negative dollar. So you cannot earn $1 and cut back $2 of spending. So it cannot go below 0. And MPC cannot go over 1. Because if it goes over 1, what it means is if you earn $1 of income, you actually spend $2. So generally speaking, this restrictions of the solutions actually valid. So that's why the multiplier effect in our model is always going to be 1 over 1 minus MPC. Now, if we put back into our previous problems, let's say we have the consumption functions, $100 plus 0.75 times y. The marginal propensity to consume in this problem is 0.75. And we will have the multiplier effect equals to 1 over 1 minus 0.75, which is equal to 4. And now the intuitions of this answer is importance. That means for every one additional dollar that people spend in the economy, the new equilibriums in the economy will actually increase by $4 values. Remember, it doesn't just increase by that one additional dollar spent in the economy, because people keep spending a portion and a portion and a portion and a portions of that dollar. And let's suppose we currently have an equilibrium incomes equals to $500 in our economy. Let's say consumptions rise by $12. And again, when we say the consumption rise by $12, we assume that this is a autonomous spending increased by $12. So in this case, what would be the new equilibrium income? So using our multiplier effect, every $1 of income, every $1 of additional spending in the economy will increase the spending by $4. And $12 increase in spending will multiply by 4, which means it's a total increase of $48 of spending in the economy. And that's why the new macroeconomic equilibrium in this case will be 548. So the equilibrium is not going to increase just by $12. The new macroeconomic equilibrium outputs will increase by $48 worth of goods and services. So it's very important for people to realize that this multiplier effect always exists in the economy, and it never actually have one economy that it's not giving you the multiplier effect. So always keep that in mind. Multiplier effect always happens. As long as someone spending will become someone's income, and people will always spend a fraction of their income in the economy to buy goods and services. Now let's summarize this multiplier effects. Number one, multiplier effects occur both when autonomous expenditure increase and also when it decreases. Multiplier effect makes the economy extremely sensitive. Any change of autonomous expenditure will cause the economy outputs to change by a much larger attitude. So in our previous case, as you can see, when someone's spending only just $12 additional in the economy outputs will increase by $48 worth of goods and services. Larger the MPC, the larger values of the multiplier. Again, you can actually play around with the number and try out when MPC equals to 0.8, when MPC equals to 0.5, to see if you get a multiplier effect that's larger or smaller. Also, the formula that we use here for the multiplier effect, it's oversimplifying. Obviously, in the real-world situation, there are a lot of things that actually affects the change of the GDP. It's not only just the change of the autonomous expenditure and the simple multiplier effect. So that's why you have to keep in mind, in this simplicity of the models, we can get a solution that is very clean. But when we're building up our model with more variables and more components to it, it will become more complex to evaluate. And also, you might want to think about how the multiplier effect will give us an answer to the distributions of incomes. And one question I would suggest you guys to think about is, why should we actually have a progressive tax system in the United States? Does it help the economy? Does it not help the economy? Does it help people to adjust the incomes in a more equal way? Well, you might want to think about how a group of people that has low income and comparing to a group of people that has a very high income in the economy. Well, which one do we want to take out the incomes and put it into our tax revenues? And also think about which groups of people actually has a higher MPC. Does the rich people has a higher MPC, or does the lower income groups will have a higher MPC? Well, if you can put this into a systematic way to think about tax policy, you might be seeing the reason why we have this progressive tax system in the United States. Now, I would like to suggest you to think about in this simple model, we should always know that the total national incomes are basically split into two. Well, it's the money that you spend to buy goods and services. And of course, you should always have leftover. The leftover will go into saving. If the national income Y, it's always equals to C plus S, consumption plus saving, you can imagine the total of MPC plus MPS, the marginal propensity to save, should always add up to 1. Or in this case, I would say the portions of your income spent on consumptions plus the portions of income that you save should add up to 100%. Again, well, this is just a very, very simple model setup. It's not necessary to be the case when using a more complex system where MPC plus MPS will always equals to 1. Again, well, this is just for the simple model that we derive in this chapter. When you are studying more advanced macroeconomic model setup, you might actually see something different, where MPC plus MPS might not equals to 1. And very important, remember in chapter 6, we talked about how we developed the modern days of macroeconomic study. John Maynard Keynes actually suggests that we didn't handle the Great Depression very well in the United States. Well, there's a reason. Because most of the macroeconomists back in the day was actually looking at the equilibriums in this model. This model here suggests that we have a macroeconomic outputs in the economy, where firms and businesses, they will decide how much goods and services they should produce in the economy. However, this macroeconomic equilibrium, it's not an indication of full employment. So in this graph, you might be able to see if the full employment outputs, or what we call the potential outputs in the economy, it's at YF, but the current macroeconomic output is at Y star. This model basically suggests all the firms and businesses, they are still making a rational choice. Everything's still running smoothly in the economy. But we might still have a lot of unemployment happens in the economy at the same time, because we are not producing enough to get the positions out to the economy for people to work. Again, this income expenditure model only gives you one side of the economy outputs durations. It does not suggest to us what level of output it's going to get us a full employment in the economy. So that's why you have to keep this in mind. This income expenditure model, it's only for the evaluations of how the economy decides on the aggregate outputs level in the economy. It does not suggest a solution of employment. Well, in the later chapters, or the next chapter, we are going to investigate on a new model. We call this the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And we would like to use the income expenditure model to slowly derive the aggregate demands in our economy. And we will combine it with the aggregate supply in the economy. And we would like to see if we can find another macroeconomic equilibriums in the models so that we can not just talk about the decisions of the firms and businesses, but also evaluate the employment status in the economy and as well as the price level in the economy. Well, for now, I would say, go ahead and start reading the textbooks in these sections that talks about the aggregate demand from the income expenditure model. As you can see in the textbooks, when price level goes up, there are several effects goes into our economy. So for instance, when the overall price level goes up, the real values of the household wealth actually decrease. So that means, well, holding the same amounts of money, you can only buy less, and that will reduce the total amount of consumption in the economy. Also, when the price level goes up, export usually will be more expensive for foreigner to buy, so that's why people will buy less from our country. But since the foreign goods are so cheap to us right now, we are going to buy more and import more goods from the other part of the world. And that will cause the net exports to decrease. Same thing happens when the price level goes up, the demand for money will increase in the economy, which drive the change of interest rates to go up. And at the end, because interest rate can change in such a setting, investment spending will fall because, well, there is a higher cost to borrow money to invest. Well, those are the three fundamental effects that we know from the change of overall price level in the economy. And we would like to actually link this concept in the next chapter and to build this aggregate demand, aggregate supply models to talk about employment, price level, and aggregate outputs all at once. Again, thank you for watching this video. Please make sure you go back and read the textbooks and understand the concepts. And I will see you guys in the next video.